Restaurant Unstoppable, inspire, empower, and transform the industry. All right, with excitement, allow me to welcome back on the show for a second time CEO and co-founder of Fifth Street Group, Patrick Whalen. Patrick, my man, are you feeling unstoppable today?
I'm feeling unstoppable. Thank you.
Yes. So this is, like I said, Patrick's second time on the show. We're welcoming him back on the show. If you did not catch episode 843, I highly recommend you head over to restaurantunstoppable.com/843 to hear Patrick's story. During that interview, and it's a question I've been asking all my guests lately, I asked, what's broken with our industry and what are you doing to be a part of the solution? How are we going to fix the broken problems with our industry? And to that question, Patrick answered, there is a wage inequity between back of house and front of house. And we need to close that wage gap between the back of house and front of house in a roundabout of words. Maybe not exactly those words, but that's the gist, right, Patrick?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
So that's what we're going to be discussing today, what your solution was, which is the Tip the Kitchen business model. And I really, you've had great success with this. Before we get into the success you've had, let's get that motivational, inspirational ball rolling with a success quote or mantra. I think I should have given you a heads up about this, but this isn't your first rodeo, so you should have known it was coming.
I got to come up with a new mantra now.
Can I put you on the spot?
No, that's fine. Tell me I can't, and I'll show you I can.
Tell me I can't, and I'll show you I can. Why did you choose that one today?
Because I think that when you innovate, especially when you innovate in an established industry or an established way of doing business, it's more comfortable to sort of stick with whatever the status quo is. It's easier. It's certainly more efficient from sort of a short-term perspective to just kind of stay with how things are. But I think if you want to successfully innovate and change things, then you need to fight that reluctance to sometimes adapt when you really have to. And so a good motivation for us has always been, and for me especially, has been when somebody tells me that I can't do something, I have a penchant for trying to prove that you can, especially if it's worthy. So
yeah, man. Great way to get this thing started. And you're kind of striking a vein with me right now because I was just in New Orleans. I'm not going to name names, but we're talking. So I'm trying to really lean into this idea of transforming the industry and sharing knowledge and getting people together who are in my network to sit down around a table in person and talk about what are you doing? What are you doing? What are you doing? And part of the pushback I got is that no matter what you do, Eric, like our industry, people in our industry just don't want to see change. The people that work in our industry are just here for a short period of time. And it's hard to get people on board. The things that you're proposing won't happen in our lifetime. It's not possible. We can't do it. And to that, I said, you're right. If you have that attitude, you're right. We won't be able to do it because whether you think you can or you can't, you're right. So I think it's really important to kind of off the cusp of what you said to us, tell me I can't and I'll show you I can. We have to believe we can, because if we believe we can't, then we won't. You're right. We won't. We can't. So it's so important that we get on board with this and think that we can, because we will not make progress. What's going through your mind as I say this?
I mean, I completely agree. I've personally bared witness to dozens of situations, whether they be full-scale business models or just ideas in your day-to-day basis, your operations that someone or something either said directly or implied was impossible, and now they are things. And so impossibility is a real thing. Like I'm not going to be able to fly personally. I can't lift up off the ground. There are some basic rules that are in place. But I think that differentiating rules of physics and mathematics that are not going to change versus a way of doing business that not only is going to change, but needs to change, are two totally different things. But a lot of times I think are sort of categorically lumped together for ease of use.
Yeah. Great way to get this started. With that, why don't you kind of, before we dive into how to do this and why you started to do this and what it was like before you were doing this, real quick, just give us some key performance indicators, some numbers that represent the success you're having.
Sure. The biggest number obviously is the top line, which is the total amount of money that we have generated towards this kitchen gratuity initiative. I actually just got the update. It's like literally in front of me while I'm looking at this. We are at $1,076,000
When did
plus
you
or
start
minus
this?
about $94. We started in April
In April
of 21. Yeah.
So it's
So
exponential.
1,076,000. Sorry.
1,076,000. Okay. So is that 1.7 or I'm trying? That's
1.076.
Okay. Sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah. So keep going.
Yeah. So that number, and the way that we got to that number was a partnership between our guests who have contributed 591,000 and change towards this initiative, and the ownership group, which I represent, which has contributed in this part of the initiative $486,000. So that's how you get to 1.076.
Okay. So part of this isn't just from, so when you say tip, let's back up a little bit, because there's another number that I thought was really interesting that I want my listeners to hear, is that how much is your dishwasher making?
Our average dishwasher is making around 50K a year for our company.
Okay. Those are pretty significant numbers. So back to how this splits up. You said what of this 1.076, what percent, how much of that is coming from partners? And you had a split two ways.
So I'll make it easy. About 600K is coming from our guests and about 500K is coming from the restaurant. Okay. Obviously that's not exactly right, but that's the ballpark. And that's been sort of the ratio since we started this, where it's gotten more favored towards the guests. But in the beginning, our hope was that the match, which is the ownership side, would be the demonstration to our guests that we were for real about this. We weren't asking them to subsidize the entire program, but rather to partner with us. And I think that those numbers, which are pretty close together, frankly, reflect that partnership.
It's the walk the walk. You can't ask of your guests what you're not willing to do yourself to make change, right?
Yeah, I mean, and not only that, I think that the level of participation, the amount of participation, both by our guests and by us, reflect a change in thinking about the way the marketplace works. It's not just that they're throwing $1 or $2 that I am. We match $500 a day, and we hit $500 a day pretty frequently. I mean, over the weekend, Saturday, I think all of the restaurants were well over $500 each. And so that was our goal from the beginning, was to motivate people to participate on a level that was actually going to affect real change in the lives of the people that were benefiting from this.
All right. Awesome. Thank you for kind of painting that picture as to where this is today. But let's go back to before you started.
Right.
Before this was even on the table as a solution. Paint that landscape, paint the picture of the pain points your restaurant was experiencing.
So this really started in March of 2021. And we were, by we, I mean Americans or humans, I guess, were coming out of what we thought was COVID. Obviously, we weren't done yet, but we were seeing the volume and the demand for going out to eat spike astronomically at all of our stores. Simultaneously, we were seeing the beginnings of the staffing crisis that has been at this point really well documented, not only in restaurants, but in lots of businesses. But I think restaurants were one of the sort of the leaders of the first impacted. We've been the vanguard of a lot of this. So we were that for the staffing crisis as well. And so what we had was this really tough situation for, I think, most restaurant owners, which was that the demand was there. The volume was there. Thank God, after a year of misery, the demand was back, and it was back in spades. But it was frustrating. It was hard, and in some cases, it was, I'm sure, maddening, because restaurants could not staff their restaurants adequately to be able to handle the volume. And that was happening in real time, where you would have a shift where you'd have, you know, 2/3 of your normal staff for a decent night, and suddenly you'd be doing volume on par with what a Saturday night would look like during the busy season. That's just a recipe for disaster. And so that was the real pressure point, not just for us, but I think for a lot of restaurants, February, March, April, that when it first started to kind of kick back in last year.
Yeah. And then you have to explain to guests who are walking in who see plenty of open seats that they can't come in because we just can't handle the volume, and how try to explain that to the over and over again. It gets pretty infuriating.
Well, it's not anything that it's not anything that you can explain to a guest. I think it's hard just from a logical standpoint to walk in and see it not a busy restaurant with a few empty tables, but rather a half full restaurant or less, where they're saying we can't take you. I think that is the part where people who might have been willing to understand don't anymore.
Yeah. What do you think the cause of the staffing shortage is? I mean, there's a few variables here. I don't know if it's worth getting into, but like one that I'm aware of, I don't know if you've heard this, is just the fact that the cost of child support, people, when you factor in the cost of child support, it's cheaper to collect unemployment and to watch your kids right now than it is to go to work and put your kids through, childcare.
Sure. That's definitely one. I think that honestly, restaurant work environments are shitty, is the honest answer. And I think that a lot of times they're very toxic. And I think that my restaurants have been part of that, before COVID. And I think it's a byproduct of having a whole bunch of things. The first is that there's a workforce of a lot of young people that don't necessarily know they want to do this as a career, creating sort of this transient quicksand. And then you've got a lot of alcohol, ready access to alcohol and drugs, late nights, and those create situations that can be potentially toxic, especially if it's already a toxic atmosphere. And then the one that really stands out to me is obviously the wage gap and the toxicity that comes with that, of the resentment that almost always permeates the front and back of the house, because the front of the house was making just exponentially more money than the back of the house was. And you can throw in there a little bit of the crazy politics of COVID and guests screaming at staff over masks or not wearing masks or hand sanitizers or menus or all the things that people want to fight over. I think that created a really, really unpleasant, frankly, hostile environment that people were being asked to come back to. And I don't blame any of them for not wanting to.
And not to get into like the whole conversation about masks, not masks. I don't want to make this like a political thing, but I do think that there's something to be said about we in this industry don't necessarily do the work for the money. Can there be money is there money to be made? Yeah. However, the people who are truly passionate about this industry don't work for the money as much as they work for the satisfaction, the smiles. We work for the instant gratification. And for the people who are in this industry who are driven by that instant gratification, the cookie, the reward, we're not getting it, like, because we don't see it not with the same kind of frequency that you did before COVID. I think that COVID has indelibly left an imprint on everyone. And so when guests go out now and they go to a restaurant, they so desperately want things to be normal again. This is at least my impression. And I think it's how I felt when I've gone out to eat, is you just want things to be normal. I've been in my house for months. I work from home. I don't have a lot of social interactions. I want to go out to eat and I want it to be normal. And when restaurants are not normal for lots of reasons that we're discussing, I think that makes people angry, because it's a reminder that we're not back to normal yet. And that restaurants are going to be a reflection of the damaged world that unfortunately we're kind of limping through right now. And so, yeah, you're right. I don't want to be political either, but
So these are real consequences that are documented across the country. This isn't our restaurant. This is every restaurant that's struggling with this. And I think it's it's a byproduct of a really tough couple of years, frankly, for everybody.
I mean, I'm talking about the psychological effect of actually being able to see smiles. I think that we don't realize how important it is for mental health to see faces. We communicate through body language and facial expressions. When you're covering that up, we're depriving ourselves of something. And again, I'm not trying to say that I'm not anti-mask or anything like that. I'm just saying it's a natural byproduct of having to do this. We're depriving ourselves of natural, intrinsic, just good vibes, good feelings, good cookies. You know what I'm saying? Like, we don't get that. It's going to bring the mood down. And I think there's definitely a subconscious thing going on here where we're just not getting that emotional and sociological reward that we would get. And I don't want to make this whole conversation about that, but I think it's a real thing that maybe might seem so insignificant, but I think it's there. I think there's something going on there. But anyway, I don't need to get into a rabbit hole, but I geek out over that stuff. So back to your story and where you were before you decided to implement this. We're going back to March 2021. What was the landscape of your businesses? Like, on a scale from 1 to 10, were people happy? What were the pain points you were experiencing before you implemented this?
I mean, we were feeling it. I actually got an email from or a phone call from my general manager at our store in Charleston base, and he he rarely reaches out to me unless something's really wrong. And he reached out and he was like 911. I said, "Oh my God." So I called him up and he was just saying, "Listen, we're doing incredible volume, but our team is getting crushed. We don't have enough people to man the kitchen. We don't have enough people to man the front of the house. The people that we have are taking crazy abuse from our guests, or at least some of them. The guys in the kitchen are just getting pounded. Like, they're not able to make good food. They're just barely keeping their head above water." Now, that was at one of the stores in Charleston. That was a precedent for what was going to ultimately happen at all the stores. That was just sort of the first to feel it. And so that was the sort of the blinking red light that we are in big trouble and we need to do something.
Yeah. So you identified the problem. How did the solution start to come to you? What was that conversation? What was that dialogue like?
I got back. I took a trip. I took my kids to Disney World in March, and which was kind of pointless. All the characters were up on like rooftops and in boats and stuff. Like, they didn't interact with the kids, which is sort of why you go. But my father-in-law really liked the Avatar ride, by the way. So if anybody ever wants to go on that, it's a great ride.
Right, isn't it?
It's pretty awesome. It is pretty awesome. He had the time of his life. Anyways, sorry, we digress. But I just gotten back from Disney World, and there was a chef that we had, not a chef, a senior line cook that we had at one of our stores, who had asked our executive chef if they could borrow some money. And the question came as to, well, what, if everything all right, or do you, and he said that he needed grocery money. And whether that was true or not, I have no idea. I didn't go with him to the grocery store afterwards. But it was a sickening feeling, because whether that was true or not for him in that moment, it was true for lots of people. And I just felt like a shit. I just got back from Disney World, and I'm having fun with my family, and there are people that are working for me that were struggling to pay the bills, and that's just that's just not an acceptable reality. And it's one that that I think, frankly, a lot of restaurant owners are going to have to look hard at themselves in the mirror and face, because that's what's going on. If you're paying somebody $12-13 an hour to work for you, $14 an hour to work for you, they're making below the poverty line. And then you're asking them to work 40-50 hours a week, you're putting them in a situation where they're below the poverty line. And that's just, that was a hard reality for me to deal with. And that's ultimately what motivated me to get Tip the Kitchen going, was that you have all these what appear to be disconnected factors meeting at one point of confluence, which is that, we don't have enough staff. We're incredibly busy, and the staff that we have is getting pounded, and the staff that we have, is not being able to make money the way that they need to be able to keep their head above water. And further, that even though the stores were busy, because I've heard this before, and this is worth talking about, even though the stores were busy and they were making money, we were paying back hundreds of thousands of dollars of debt from 2020. I mean, I'm not talking about 10 grand, 20 grand. I'm talking about hundreds of thousands of dollars of debt. In fact, company-wide, over $1 million. And so we weren't in a position to be able to say, okay, well, we'll just, pay any amount of money to everybody, because we weren't even in the red at that point. We weren't even in the black at that point. So I'm sitting here going, we have to pay these guys more money. We can pay them some more money, but sooner or later, we are no longer solvent. How do we get more money into this operation? How do we get more money into the operation in a way that allows our staff to make more? Now, there were places that were raising prices. There were places that were adding, 5% fees and all this other stuff. But I just view those as all being, price raises, which were not acceptable options to me. Raising prices turns guests away and narrows the field of people that could potentially come to your restaurant, which is ultimately what funds everything. So raising prices was not an acceptable solution for us. And
yeah.
So
on that vein, keep going. Like, what were the other? So you looked at raising prices, decided that wasn't an option. What were the other possible?
I mean, we looked at right. Sorry, we looked at. I mean, the one thing that we looked at the most carefully, or at least that I did, was what Union Square Hospitality Group was trying to do up in New York, which was to eliminate tipping completely, and just raise prices. And I think so. Danny Meyer is the owner, and I don't know what his title is, but he's the owner and founder of that group. And I mean, I had friends that had worked for him during that, and there was talk, just basically that was not an approach that was working very well.
So was that increase 5%? I think I heard you mention that was what they did increase.
No, they increased. No, they got rid of tipping altogether. So I think they increased prices 25%, 30%, somewhere in that range, to be able to eliminate tipping altogether. And so raising prices 30% or even 25% is a lot of money. That's a lot. And so funny, I think that
it is a lot, but at the same time, I feel like that's what people are spending anyway. Like, there's a psychological thing going on there.
Right, but what you're eliminating is choice, which is a big part of Tip the Kitchen. Something that I think the inherent flaw in the sort of radical shift from no tipping from tipping to no tipping, and I respect what they did. I think it was brilliant. Frankly, it just didn't really work. And I think it didn't work because it took away choice from the guests.
Yeah,
it said everyone has to pay this right now, and the other problem of it is that other restaurants were not participating. I think that no tipping works if everyone participates, but the minute that there are places that don't participate, then the earning power of your front of house staff in particular goes flying up, because your top servers can make more money somewhere else. And so if you're not able to provide an environment where the best people make the most money, they're going to leave.
Yeah.
And that's sort of where that particular model started to scare me and go sideways a little bit.
Is this what you were hearing from the people that worked in this restaurant?
Yes. And it was discussed. I mean, other people that were contemporaries that work in New York, I mean, it's discussed pretty actively on social media. I had one friend in particular who was working at one of his stores that said that was a problem, keeping or hiring and retaining good staff. I didn't go work there. I wasn't a manager there, and so everything that I got was secondhand. But they have moved away from that model now, probably because of COVID. Some of the other restaurants that did the no tipping thing have moved away from the model as well. And so I think that the lack of choice that the guests didn't enjoy, or the guests were forced to take, was too much for them. It just They didn't. The Americans need their choice. They want choice, and
choice
when you
too. And
take
I
that
think
away from them, they lose it. They just can't deal with it.
and I think there's something to be said about it feels good to tip. It feels good to know that you're doing
It does.
good. It feels good to do good. And I think when
Even
you're
though it's expected, it's not mandatory,
but you,
right? And
yeah,
I
so
think
you're part of
people
the
think
you're on
that,
the good, you're one of the good guys when you do it, right? So that
right?
feeling, that little release of endorphins that you get when you say, yeah, you know what? Here's
Well, maybe
20%.
that's
It
maybe
makes
that's
you,
their cookie, right? Isn't
yeah,
that what we're just talking about? That's the guest's cookie,
yeah,
is that they get the opportunity to show their appreciation.
exactly. But I do want to reemphasize what you said about no other restaurants were participating. And I think that's one of the big things that I'm trying to do is say, hey, if we're going to create change, it can't just be one restaurant. We need to start
Right.
sharing this information. We need to make a collective effort to do these things so that it becomes standard. And yeah, is there going to be pushback? Is there going to be resistance? But there's strength in numbers. If we collectively say we are going to start doing this, we are going to start taking care of our industry, we are going to start taking care of our employees and charging what we need to charge and doing what we need to do to be considered as a legitimate business or career
Industry.
path
Yeah.
for people, the sole purpose, in my opinion, the sole purpose of going into business is to create other opportunities for others. And it's impossible to do that. There isn't enough resource to create opportunity.
Mm-hmm.
I mean,
Well, it's funny because
agree with that?
I mean, I think if we're contrasting some of the functional problem of the no tipping model, is that the no tipping model relies on other restaurants to also participate. Because if other restaurants don't participate, it undercuts their ability to sort of set the marketplace. Whereas Tip the Kitchen is the inverse. I don't need any other restaurants to participate in Tip the Kitchen at all. They don't want to do it. They don't have to do it. It gives me a remarkable advantage over the marketplace. And so theoretically, the more restaurants that participate hurt me, because that's more people that I have to compete with that are able to pay on level that I pay. That said, I think it's a good thing any which way. But that differentiating factor between that model and our model is a really important one, because I can self-sufficiently run Tip the Kitchen in my company forever, and I'll never change that. And I don't need other places to do it or not, because our system works in a standalone model, and it also works in a group model.
We're back, and we've been kind of just discussing the issues. This is going back before you decided to implement this program. We should call it a business model, because that's really what it is, right? You corrected me in the past.
Yeah.
So
yeah, it's a business model. Sure.
So what made you, kind of summarize real quick, what made you land on the Tip the Kitchen business model? Like, what made you say, this is our path, this is what's going to work for us?
I think that the crowdsourcing sort of functionality of this is what makes it really work. I don't like forcing people to pay more money. I don't like people forcing me to pay more money. And I know that people don't like being nickel and dime. And so, because it's a gratuity that's not required, the Tip the Kitchen component is not required, it's really up to the guests what they put in or they don't. And that piece of it is what makes it so pliable, because 21% of our guests actually have left a gratuity for the kitchen. 21.3% of our total guest count have left a tip for the kitchen. That means that 79% didn't. That means that a vast majority of our guests are saying to us, I'm not ready to pay more money for what I received, which is absolutely fine. I have no issue with that. That might be their economics. It might be the product that I'm delivering. It might be the environment that we're in right now. It might be the nature of inflation. Everybody's scared. Whatever. It doesn't make any difference. I don't need even half of the people to participate in the Tip the Kitchen model to make it work. In fact, it's working better than I think initially I had hoped it would work this quickly, with, like I said, 21% participating. If you're looking at it from that perspective, you're not forcing people to pay more money. The way that a friend of mine described it was basically an optional way to raise prices that you know as a guest exactly where the money is going. I think a lot of times people don't like being nickel and dime because they're like, well, where does this money go and where does that money go? In our case, if you leave a tip to the kitchen, 100% of that tip goes to the kitchen. 100% goes to the kitchen. And so when I say I'm raising prices across the board 25%, you as a consumer, Eric, have no idea what I'm doing with that money. I could be putting all that in my pocket. Maybe I'm going to go back to Disney World. Maybe I'm going to go ride Jeff Bezos's rocket ship into outer space. But if I tell you this is for Tip the Kitchen specifically, that money goes to the kitchen staff specifically.
So there are some questions coming in. Thank you, Bob. I see your questions. We will get to them. I know that's a question I had as well, but I kind of want to continue into this idea, I guess. So a lot of this seems to be psychological. And what I'm thinking, what I'm curious about are there things we can do to create like an app, for example, or a loyalty program that creates almost like, hey, if you choose to leave a tip for the kitchen, there's something in it for you beyond just the gratification.
Sure. We could flag. We haven't gotten that far yet, but we certainly could flag it. I think my concern about any added incentive, besides the fact that the ownership is participating, which I think is an incentive, is that I don't want people that don't participate to feel as though they're doing something wrong. This is why we don't set a market. Like on our receipts, we don't, sometimes at the bottom of the receipt, they'll say suggested tip 18, 20, 21 or whatever. We don't set a marketplace for a tip for the kitchen because frankly, we don't want to. We don't want to tell people how much to spend or how little to spend. We only want them to leave a tip if they really feel like their experience was worthy. If you feel as though the place that you're eating at is providing all this incentive for you to leave a tip, it might feel solicitous, which is actually one of our rules. Is we don't want to ever solicit a tip for the kitchen. In fact, our staff is instructed specifically not to discuss it unless a guest asks, because I don't want our guests to feel as though they're obligated to leave a tip for the kitchen. And so if there's incentives beyond just the program that exists now, I would worry about the people that don't leave tips feeling as though they're obligated to do so. I would like them to come to this naturally. If somebody has a great steak and they're like, oh my God, that was awesome, and they want to leave a tip, perfect. And then if after that they feel like maybe I should just always do this as part of going out to eat, that's their prerogative, or maybe they don't. But I want them to get there on their own rather than feeling like I'm pushing that along on them.
Yeah. Okay. I think what I really want to start to get into like the nitty gritty of actually how you set this up. So when you implemented it, what does like the actual, like take us through step by step. I want to do this for my restaurant. Sure. What is the process? What are the tools? What do I need to know to execute this well?
So the first thing is that we've published all of our systems and functionality on social media platforms called Tip the Kitchen, tip_kitchen on Twitter. And I forget what the one is on Instagram, but same idea. I'm sure if you search for it, you'll find it. And in that, it reports all of our weekly performance. We'll do that for 1 year. So we'll do it through May 1st. But it also talks about the rules when we set this up. We had 5 rules, which I don't actually even remember what they are. I know what they are sort of from a basic standpoint, but the way you start is you have to teach the guests first what they're doing. And so we have a little cutout, a little section of each of our menus that describes what Tip the Kitchen is, how it works, where the money goes, what it's intended for, and why we're doing that. At the same time, you have to train sort of the back of the house functionality of how it works. You have all this new revenue coming in. There has to be a way to control it, manage it, make sure it's going to the appropriate people. And so we sort of approached it from both sides, trying to meet at the middle. So the accounting, human resources side designed spreadsheets and sort of reports where you could see who worked and where the money was distributed to. And then the marketing front of house side designed the menus and the presentation. Obviously, we've done some press, and so we pushed it to try to inform our guests as to what we're doing. And each time that you do it, you work closer and closer towards the whole house being on the same page as to how the system works and runs.
So the rules, just to make sure I understand, there's a couple rules. The first rule is you have to teach the guests how it works. The second rule is you have to teach the staff how it works.
I mean, these are not the rules, the Tip the Kitchen rules. These are sort of my rules for the purposes of this conversation right now. I think the rules are it's the choice of the guest. It's entirely up to them. We don't want to solicit. We don't want to ask them for it. It's only for a worthy experience. All of the money goes to the kitchen staff that's all hourly staff and all salaried staff that make less than, I think it's 70 grand a year. I might have moved up to 75, but I think it's 70 grand a year. So if you make $70,000 or less, you participate. If you make more than that, then you don't. And I think in our stores, that threshold really speaks to only like the executive chef or director positions. And that's really, and then the store matches. And so, you know, if you leave a $50 tip, Eric, if you come in, you leave a $50 tip, then the store matches $50 to make sure that the guests understand that this is not us soliciting them, but rather a partnership between the hospitality industry and our guests to pay our people in a way that allows them to make a livable wage.
Okay. So so when you say no soliciting, you can't in that moment be like, oh, by the way, you can leave a tip for.
I mean, to me, that's like the only part of the restaurant experience that's truly transactional is when they pay, right? Is when the guests pay. And I hate it, honestly. It's always is very crass. Just the whole, it's like you've built this amazing experience for them between the design and the music and the food and the timing and the service. It's intended to completely immerse them and transport them away from reality. And then right when they're about to leave and they're feeling good and they're on desserts, you put a check in front of them and you remind them of reality.
Yeah.
You know, which we're all used to at this point. I actually love that Uber, you don't even see it on Uber. It just comes out of your account. I wish we could figure out how to do that.
The thing is, why can't we figure out how to do that? And
we probably can.
I'm like, this is the argument.
Put that on the list.
Is like membership models.
I don't like how I think the reason why we have to is because of the gratuity side of it. If it was just the payment side, maybe you could do it on an app. I don't know. Somebody out there who's listening, figure it out, and you can have the idea. But
just a membership model. Like if you are on this list, you depending what tier you're in, determine how many meals you get a month, and you come in. Maybe you scan something, you're in
subscription services. Yeah, maybe.
And then whether or not they show up, you're getting that cash flow. And if they hit their, you know, if they hit their limit, then you say, hey, like you hit your limit, you can move to the next tier if you want, or we have to charge you additional for today's meal. But ideally, if you make that process
seamless, it's like a house account. Yeah, exactly. It's like a house account.
There's digital tools and resources to us that have never been there before that make that seamless and so easy. There's got to be a way to figure it out.
That's actually I have a tangent. You want to hear it? I have a tangent idea. You want to? So I had this idea of this thing where you have an app on your phone, and this is subscription based, and it's tied to Open Table maybe or Resi or whatever system, and it's called the red button. Yeah. And what it does is you get to use it one time a meal, and you push the button, and it sends an alert to all of the phones or all the devices that are connected to the network, and it alerts the manager that there's an issue at the table. And what it does is it saves the time and the frustration when something's wrong. Now, you can't use it over and over and over again. So if you've just got a million problems, that's not going to work. And you shouldn't use it unless you absolutely have to. But let's say, for example, there's a problem with your food. It just gets put down. You cut into it. Your steak is really undercooked. Let's just say it's that. You push this button, and the steak goes. The manager comes right over. Instead of having to wait and flag them down or wait for the server to come back, and maybe they get busy at another table, and so you either just eat it or you get pissed off and you don't eat it and you leave it to the side. You push this button, a manager comes over within 2 minutes, grabs the steak, takes it back. That way you eliminate the time that you're pissed. It's like your guest is pissed when they can't eat. They're here to eat and they can't eat.
Yeah.
And also it eliminates the time that you spend interacting with somebody that can't fix the problem. You go to the server's going to have to go get a manager. The manager's going to have to come over. All that takes time. And that time is time where you're annoyed. This speeds up the process.
Slows down when you're in that.
It's true. When you're hungry,
but it feels like 10.
Everyone else at the table is eating. You can't. And so you end up having to send the food back.
All right.
This will help the restaurants because the restaurants can make more money because they don't waste all their money comping food. Anyways, sorry. That's my
Resi,
tangent.
open table,
Take
toast.
it.
If you're
Do
listening
it.
to this, come on. It's a good idea. Okay. Thank you for that. So back to tip the kitchen. So where we left off is kind of, we understand the basic rules. No soliciting. It has to be a choice. You have to educate the customer. You have to educate the staff. These are kind of the obvious thing. And the house matches. So what is that when the house matches? Do you have like a profit account that's set up? Where does that money come from? I guess is it coming from the profit, the owner's profit overpay?
It's an operating expense. It's part of your expense. It's
so that match
we
comes
park
from
it in
operational expense account. Got it.
Yes, exactly.
Got it. And does that? I mean, I guess over time, did you see what that is, and like, has it gotten to an issue where that tip the kitchen has pulled so much from your OpEx account that you can't cover your other liabilities like labor and cost of goods sold? Or how do you identify that? Is it part of your prime cost?
The direct expense of tip the kitchen comes out company-wide. Now, obviously each restaurant's different, but for us across the 5 restaurants is about 3.3% operating expenses. So our operating expenses have gone up by 3.3%. If you're only looking at that expense sort of under a microscope, what that expense has done is more or less eliminated the need for training and for constant hiring because your staff doesn't quit. You don't have turnover. Pre-COVID, I think that our turnover rate was around 1%, maybe even a little bit higher. Since we started Tip the Kitchen, I think we're at 0.1%.
What about your shrinkage?
0.2%.
Wait, say that one more time.
So we were north of 1% in turnover costs. I'm saying direct turnover costs. So like training, ads on Craigslist or on Indeed or whatever, hiring. Now I think we're at like 0.1 or 0.2% company wide. So we've had, I guess, about a 1% savings, direct savings on training. So when I say 3.3%, it's actually more like 2.3% if you deduct out the training costs. And that doesn't speak to any of the other stuff any of the other financial benefits of not constantly turning your team over, like for example, overcooking dishes or
shrinkage,
crazy overtime, or
yeah. So like, have you been tracking the data on shrinkage, and is there a trackable? I mean, the trend down?
I mean, we don't turn over staff, but the big thing is that we have not raised our prices, and yet our food costs have stayed fairly stable. They've gone up a little bit, but we haven't raised prices in spite of the fact that most of the product that's out there has gone up by 20 to 30% in terms of cost. So we've been able to do that because our normal waste, our normal like mistakes and stuff are down by, I don't know the number. I could probably look it up pretty quickly, but we don't have a ton of mistakes anymore. We don't have to throw away food or product anymore because we've got kitchen staff that cares.
If you had to guess what your percentage is on waste and shrinkage down, a whole point, half a point?
At least a point.
A point,
I would guess.
So you're making you're right now. You're only up a point, a little over a point, maybe a point and a half total increase to be able to pay your dishwashers $50,000 a year. I mean,
it's well, not only that, Eric, is okay. So let's say your profit margin is 10%, but because of Tip the Kitchen, it's now 9%, right?
Yeah.
But what would you rather have? Would you rather profit 10% on $1 million, or would you rather profit 9% on $2 million?
Exactly.
And so the Tip the Kitchen and the ability to handle the volume, handle immense volume because you don't have turnover and handle it the right way, has allowed us to be, from a margin standpoint, slightly less, but on a lot more revenue. I mean, our revenue, let's just use Church and Union Charleston as an example. Our 2019 revenue was like $5.6 million, I think, plus or minus, somewhere in there. Our 2021, during COVID, in the midst of all this craziness, our top line, I think, was like 8.4 million.
Up almost over 3 million.
Up over $3 million.
Yeah.
So we were able to, so the volume was there to be had, and we were able to handle the volume because we had the staff and because we had good staff that was trained, and we weren't buried in constant turnover. And that's not just the kitchen that's impacted, by the way. It's the front of house managers that are constantly having to hire people and fire people and look on Craigslist and write people up and all that. all that is sort of, it's not completely gone because that's not a realistic expectation in a business. But again, I think we're down, like we were at a point in maybe 1 point as a company. I think we're down to 0.2,
Yeah.
0.1. So it's not just the direct savings, it's also the savings of time and energy and frankly misery that people, a chef doesn't want to sit there and look at Indeed. A chef doesn't want to look at Craigslist all day at a bunch of people that end up not showing up for their interviews. What a chef wants to do is make food and be creative and work with their vendors and teach. To think of a chef as anything less than at least partially an artist is an incorrect assumption. Every great chef is at least somewhat an artist, and if you take them away from their art and you make them, sit in front of a computer all day long, you're going to have a chef who's either miserable or has one foot out the door.
Yeah. Yeah. So I kind of want to drill down a little bit further and get into the nitty gritty. What tech stack are you using and how are you implementing that to track and to collect payment? And what are the things we need to do operationally, systematically execute this?
So to my knowledge, the only 2 point of sale systems that exist currently where you can add a kitchen gratuity line are PosiTouch, which we use, and Toast, which is grown in popularity pretty dramatically recently. So you have to program and put a line on your receipt that says kitchen gratuity. That's the first step. That's the sort of the facilitator that allows the guest to actually participate. Then on our end, we have spreadsheets that we've created that have lists of all of the employees that work for us, and then the days that they work. We just enter in, that they worked, that they qualify for Tip the Kitchen, and then they get their equal share based on however many people work that day. And then we record it in our end of day reports so we can go back and reconcile if we have to.
Okay. So what are the qualifying things? You said under $70,000. They have to be salary or hourly, or what?
They can be salary or hourly, as long as their take home, if their salary, they have to make less than 70 grand a year. If they're hourly, they participate regardless.
So any salary below 70,000 in all hourly back of house staff.
Yes.
Any other
that number might be 75K. I wish somebody would text me and tell me, but I think it might be 75.
Give
but
or take
it's either
5,
70 or 75.
Yeah, around there.
The point of that number is it's market based. So in New York, that number might be higher because the city, obviously, the pay there is a little higher than it is here. It's intended to be market based, but either 70 or 75 grand is still speaking to the same sort of segment of the workforce.
I'll put market based, basically. Just that depends on your market. Any other qualifying variables we should know
about? They have to work 4 hours. So
a minimum of 4 hours a week.
A minimum of 4 hours. No, I'm sorry, per shift. So to qualify that shift to participate in Tip the Kitchen, they have to have worked at least 4 hours, which is, we pick that number as being sort of the halfway point of an 8-hour shift, of a full-time shift.
Okay. So now that we know what the qualifying variables are to be considered for this program, how do you decide where the money goes?
It's just divided equally between everybody that works that shift.
So you get $100 that is earned for Tip the Kitchen. Hopefully we'll say $1,000 that's earned in a night for Tip the Kitchen. You got 10 people working back of house. That's easy numbers. You would just split that $100 per person. Provided
that they all work over 4 hours and get paid less than $70,000. Yes.
So let's get into like the line item. So you say the 2 POS systems that that are able to create a service charge, and is there anything when it comes to legalities of how that has to show up on the ticket?
I think you just need to explain what it is. I mean, the ticket, our ticket says kitchen gratuity. So there's no confusion as to where that money is supposed to be going. And further, we reinforce that, like I mentioned earlier, we reinforce that with the description on the menu, exactly because it's a new marketplace, it's a new revenue stream. We list exactly on the menu who is the beneficiary of these monies. And from a legality standpoint, that's an important question you're asking, because this is basically unprecedented from a legal standpoint. When you talk about the server tips, the front of house tips, that's been litigated and appealed. And I mean, there's lots of precedents in place there as to how much you can tip out, who you can tip out. tip credits from a taxing standpoint. There's a lot of information. When it comes to this, there's basically nothing because this doesn't exist. I mean, there are a few other restaurants around the country that do something like this, but not enough to have any kind of real defining legal merit, I suppose.
So if I go to one of your restaurants and I have a great meal and I get the check, there's going to be 3 lines. There's going to be tip, kitchen gratuity, sorry, and then total, and then the place. And then is it a legality that you have to put a description of where the kitchen gratuity goes? You said you put it on the menu. Is that
I don't think so.
Your butt or okay?
I mean, I don't know. Again, like I said before, I'm not positively sure. I think better safe than sorry. The service staff has been really thoroughly trained how to explain that if asked, and only if asked. They don't discuss it otherwise. But if a guest asks, these guys are walking encyclopedias on Tip the Kitchen. They can tell you about the people's names of the people in the kitchen that are the beneficiaries of it and what their jobs are and how it works. But until they're asked, they don't talk about it.
What if you get a tip that's like outrageous, like
$1,700?
Yeah, like a $1,700 tip.
We got one of those. Yeah,
and you're like,
Christian Union Charleston got one of those.
I gotta match that. Like, what
well, no, the max match that I pay is $500. So the max that I match is $500, and so that happened. That's happened a few times of really substantial tips, but like huge tips. One guy came in to Charleston with his son for his son's birthday, and the dish that the son wanted was taken off the menu, but our staff, our kitchen guys, worked together, and I say guys, I mean guys non-gender based. I'm from the Northeast and we call everybody guys, but the people in the kitchen, I suppose, put together this dish. It was the kid's birthday and they made it happen for him. And so the dad said, I want to make sure that everybody in the kitchen makes $100 tonight. How many people work today? They said 17. So he tipped $1,700, and then I matched 500. So, I mean, there were other tips too that day, but those two combined was $2,200 that went to the kitchen that day from that table.
But I could see this. Unfortunately, I could see people who are kind of slimy. They had 10 people who work in the kitchen could all pull together, $1,700 collectively and give it to their friend and say, come into dinner and give this to us.
So do it. So
but
fine. So do it.
Like, I can see it where people would.
I look at it like this. I look at it this way: is my intention is to pay the $500 per restaurant every day, no matter what. That's what I want. That's my preference. And in my mind, you were asking before about increases in operating expenses. I view that as a labor expense. I view that as a built-in labor expense that if I wasn't doing the Tip the Kitchen, I was going to have to spend most, if not all, that money, probably more, on hiring staff anyways. But Tip the Kitchen is what really pushes it over the top and allows that money to work for us. So basically, on the operator side, the way that I hope other restaurateurs would consider this is we basically created a machine that's able to double the money that we can pay our kitchen staff, as long as you're willing to pay your kitchen staff the money. Mm-hmm. Like, you can't put that money in your pocket as an operator. That's not your money that belongs to the kitchen. But if you follow this model, your spending power is increased by almost 2 to 1, which is, for an operator's point of view, is a great thing.
Yeah, I'm putting a note. I think I'm just a mental note here. I would love to do a workshop, whether it's with you, maybe not a workshop.
Yeah, of course.
Of like a screen share of walking people through step by step how to add that additional line, gratuity to the kitchen, so everybody knows how to do that. And back end.
Is it okay if I have like a team with me, because I don't know how to do anything really. I just get people to help me.
A step-by-step on how to do that would be really great. And we can talk about that later, but I think that'd be very helpful for our listeners. And that would be a live event in the network when we do that. So we'll keep you posted on that. Okay. Anything we haven't discussed as far as the elements of how to execute this? We talked about legalities. We talked about how the money is being divvied up. We talked about the qualifying factors. What are the elements we have not discussed that will round this off to fully help people understand how to implement this?
The big piece that's missing here, and I think one of your listeners asked this question, is what happens to the front of house staff?
Yeah, that was one of my questions I was going to ask too, but I want to make sure we got
right.
There's nothing else regarding the step-by-step process on how to execute and implement. I want to make sure we're wrapping that up. There's no key to the recipe that we need to be able to execute this.
I think, not that I can think of right now, I would certainly say that anybody who is contemplating this needs to be prepared to have a lot of conversations with their staff and do a lot of training. Because what makes this work is a partnership, not just between the ownership and the guest, but also between the kitchen and the front of the house. In a perfect world, this is designed not only to make the kitchen more money, but really to try to address some of those issues that you and I discussed at the beginning of this, which is that there is a toxic atmosphere driven by a wage gap between the front of the house and the back of the house. And so to get people on board with this, you have to work hard. Even if it benefits them, you have to work hard, because again, people don't always like to change. Tell me I can't, and I'll show you that I can. And so we spent an enormous amount of time talking to our staff, backing up the things that we said with data, being as transparent as we possibly could financially, so that people bought in. Because once they buy in, once the servers and bartenders buy in, the tip percentage starts going up even further, because they want the kitchen guys to make money. They want the people in the back to narrow the gap, because it makes for a better work environment. But that takes a lot of investment of time. So this isn't necessarily a line out on a receipt or a point of sale system, but it is an absolutely essential part of making Tip the Kitchen work, is that you need the buy-in from everybody in your team to do it.
So I have questions. We're going to answer those questions because I'm interested in those too, but I really want to make sure we unpackage the how to execute, and getting the cultural buy-in is huge. So any advice on that, how to pitch this to your team, how to roll it out, the things that your team needs to hear in order to be more likely to buy in?
First thing is have an open door policy when it comes to finances. If there's a Tip the Kitchen related question, it gets elevated to me and upper management immediately. I hope. Maybe I hope they have. But I know that I've seen quite a few come across my email inbox that are easily fixed. But if you don't fix them in a timely fashion, just like that guy waiting for that undercooked steak with the red button, the negative space starts to get filled with negative thoughts. And so it's our job as the people that are administering this to try to resolve the problems really, really quickly. So have an open door policy when it comes to this. Second thing is to know the system forwards and backwards, and realize that if you don't know what you're talking about and you try to BS somebody about their money, they're going to lose faith completely. You got to know what you're talking about if you want to initiate a program that changes the way people earn their money. And be willing to admit if there's something wrong with it. Our servers came to us at Tempest, our other restaurant in Charleston, a few months ago, and they pointed out that a certain component of this was problematic. Now, it didn't amount to a whole lot of money, but it was a fair point they made, and we immediately went and said, you know what, you're right, and we adjusted it to try to fit what they were pointing out. And we didn't just adjust it at Tempest, but we adjusted it at all of our restaurants. And so I think being willing to understand that, again, this is a new system, it's a new model, and being adaptive without changing the sort of the skeletal structure of it is not only important, but it's necessary to thoroughly vet a new system. Who knows? Maybe problems are going to come up that couldn't have been anticipated. It's our job to be willing to adapt.
Yeah. So, and back to how to onboard the staff in this program, open door policy, basically open book management, know the system for implementing inside and out. Just basically and when I hear that, I hear you educating the staff on how it works to the T, and the how the whole, what you basically just did for us today.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They probably would like less of it. My management would probably like to hear a little less of it, frankly, because I talk about it so much. But yes, that's true.
But I think that's one of the biggest lessons I've learned on the show is culture isn't just what you say it is, it's what you do every day. It's the thing, it's the conversations, it's your language. It's all this stuff is your culture. And if you want something to be a certain way, you have to echo it. You have to bring it to the surface. You can't just say, this is how we do it one time. It's ongoing. I think the best example of this is Hertz Schulze's with the hotel. Oh my God, I can't believe Ritz-Carlton. He was kind of the man behind Ritz-Carlton for the longest time. They cycle through all their standards of excellence. There's 24 of them on a loop every day. They start with 1, they go to 2, and they go to 24, and they start back at 1. and you have to echo these things constantly, because if you don't, then it settles, it goes to the wayside. So anyway, I digress, but any other elements on how to get your staff to buy in? Because I think that's such an important element. I'm really drilling here, but I want to make sure we're not missing anything, because I don't think this has ever been documented before. So I want to make sure we can get as much of that as possible.
I mean, certainly, using our data would be a smart move. I mean, I publish everything. And so, doing it the first time is, when there's no precedence, is a little terrifying. But now that granted, we're only one group, but we've got 5 restaurants and we've been doing it up for a year at all the places where we will be. And so, we're not doing it for a year, we're doing it forever, but we're going to publish it for a year. And so
where do we find
having all of our data is on Tip the Kitchen, the Twitter page, Instagram page, it's all published.
Sorry, I cut you short. What were you going to say?
So I think being able to go and say, to your servers, hey, if you follow this model, your tip percentage is not going to be reduced. Or go to your kitchen guys and say, hey, if you follow this model, you're going to be able to make $10,000, $15,000 more a year or more. To get that initial buy-in, to go to your management and say, hey, if you follow this model, you will spend 90% or more less time on LinkedIn, Indeed, Craigslist, in interviews, and that's front and back of the house, because you're just not constantly turning people over. If you are able to present that to your team, and like you said, reinforce it over and over again with its merit, it makes it just a lot easier to get the buy-in. So I think you can't just go to the entire staff and say, in the management, and say one shot, hey guys, we're doing Tip the Kitchen. Ta-da. Yeah. So you have to attack the different departments with the things that those departments need to hear to be able to affect the change the way that you want.
So one more quick question around, you said open book management, open finance is really important. I get a lot of pushback when I talk to operators about open book finance, and they say the dishwasher doesn't give a shit about where the money's going and how the money works. And no matter how much I want to tell them, they just won't care. So that level, like at what level?
That's just for what it's worth. Let me just say something. That's a total disgrace. Just because the dishwasher doesn't give a shit today about how the economics works, doesn't mean that they might not 5 years from now. They might not give a shit because they don't understand the scale. They don't understand because they don't care. They don't care because you didn't give them any reason to care, because they're making $12 an hour at your Buffalo Wild Wings washing dishes. If you give them a reason to care, most people will. So I'm sorry. I don't buy that. I don't buy that they don't care. I think that people care about the things that are important to them. And if they don't care about what you're saying, it's because you're not important to them.
So what about profit? How far do you take open book management? Does your team know how much money you take home?
Yeah. I mean, I don't know if we print reports every week. This is before Tip the Kitchen. We print reports every week we call actuals. And they're more or less just a summary profit and loss statement. They're not perfect. They're estimates in a lot of cases, but we publish them every week. We have managers meetings. They're reviewed in managers meetings. The budgets are written for the following week or the following weeks. And so we're like, I mean, we're not open book with our servers and bartenders yet, although I don't really have an objection being so. But we are with our management team to give them the tools that they need to understand how to manage a business financially. And then obviously for Tip the Kitchen, we've been open book with our revenue and where we're spending some of our money in order to show how it all works. But I mean, I'll publish my P&Ls. I don't care. Anybody can look.
Well, thank you for clarifying that. That's where I get pushback. And I was curious, because I'm sure you probably hear pushback too. And I wanted to know what your argument was. And I'm happy you got into that. So we started talking about where the pushback is. You said that there was one example at Tempest where your servers came and said, this isn't working. Here's what's not working. What was that pushback? Well, give me an example of some of the other pushback you get. Because if we do this in our restaurants, we're probably likely to come across similar pushbacks. So let's get ahead of it. Let's have the answer to that pushback before people present it to us.
So are you talking about, okay, so there's 2 different kinds of pushback that we've received. The one is internally from staff, and that was the only incident that I think I've ever had with staff with this that I've heard about that was substantial. But most of the pushback came from sort of the outside world. So should I just discuss the technical side of the staff's issue?
Get into both. I think it's important to be ahead of this, because if we can foresee the pushback, we can have, if we have an answer in that moment, I think we can have, get ahead of it.
The staff's issue was really technical. It was regarding the backstop, which we haven't discussed yet, which I think we're going to, and how the functionality of how it worked, how we determined what was a split tip versus what it wasn't. But let's back burner that for a second. The biggest issue that anybody initiating this program is going to be is people not understanding it and jumping to shitty conclusions and making uninformed hot takes. That is the number one issue. You're going to go online and you're going to say, okay, we're doing tip the kitchen. And you're going to get 101 comments of people screaming at you, pay your staff a livable wage. Why don't you stop being such a greedy fucking asshole and pay your staff a livable wage? You're going to hear that ad nauseum. And sadly, you're going to hear it first from people in the industry. You're going to hear it first from people in the restaurant business. And then you're going to hear it from people that are not in the restaurant business, but just feel compelled to talk about it. Mm-hmm. We have gotten so much feedback like that. In fact, the first couple months of this, every time a new story ran, there'd be a comment section and it would just be filled with the same thing over and over and over again. Why not just raise prices? Why not just pay them a livable wage? Why not do this? Why not do that? And first of all, most of the comments were people that don't work in the restaurant business, and so they don't understand the economies of it. Secondly, most of the comments were people that clearly didn't read the articles or read how the system works. And so they were just sort of jumping to the conclusion this is another attempt to nickel and dime customers to quote unquote subsidize or underwrite the operations. I think just being informed about the system prepares you to be able to deal with those kinds of things. It's not true. I mean, it's not true. We're not asking our guests to sort of unilaterally pay for anything. We're asking them to partner with us, and that has really worked. I want to pay my staff a livable wage, but I also want to be solvent. And at the time when we initiated this, I was not solvent. Most restaurants weren't, and most restaurants aren't right now.
What's
so some sort of
for dummies like me? Not just what do you mean by solvent? Just to define.
So it means that you're able to keep the lights on and stay open.
Got it.
Most restaurants right now are completely buried in debt from the last 2 years, and so on paper, none of them are solvent.
You can't do it at the expense of your business,
right? I mean, if I was saying, okay, if I was making 30% profit and just stacking up money and saying I can't pay my staff, that's a different story. But if I'm struggling to stay solvent, like 95% of independently owned restaurants are right now, I think that people should listen. I'm not saying it because the description of the restaurant person that you said before of people that are not doing this just for the money or they've got other motivations. I think that describes me and my group to a T. I think we want to be able to be profitable and we want to be able to return on our investment and be solvent and sustainable. But I think we also don't want to do so if we're doing it at the expense of other people being able to live a normal life. And so that's a real fallacy that I think people are so quick to go to, which is that, oh, they're just greedy owners and they're just ripping us off and they're just nickeling, they're just asking for a little bit more. They just want a little bit more from us. And that's just patently false. And so being prepared to answer those questions is critically important at the outset. And also just being able to say, this is a new system. Not everyone's going to like it. Not everyone's going to get it. And I believe in the long-term positive effects of this, and they'll win people over. And it has.
Yeah. So that we discussed the consumer, the outward facing pushback, but have we touched on the inward, the in-house pushback?
Okay. So, yeah. I mean, again, the in-house, it wasn't really pushback as much as it was, I'm a server, right? I'm comfortable with the way things are going. I make a steady income. I like my job. I know what I'm going to get when I come in here. And that provides relief for me. And I have far less stress because of it. Now you have this kind of radical system that's directly impacting their tips in some cases. And I have to trust the ownership, and I have to trust somebody besides myself to make sure that my money's handled properly. And I hate to say this, but you restaurant owners that are listening know this is true. There's a lot of the restaurant owners that are out there that are dishonest, that don't function properly. I'm sorry.
I just came from New Orleans. I'm not going to name names. because I
I've
just
had
don't.
personal experiences with this. Many personal experiences with this.
Yeah, there are people who are abusing tip the kitchen, where they say this money is going to the kitchen, and guess what? The kitchen doesn't get it. And I'm not going to say who, because that's what we're here to do. But that is a good way to create a lot of distrust in the industry.
Yes.
So if you're going to do this, freaking do it. Please don't ruin this. Like be.
Well, I've seen a bunch of something, Eric, that I think is worthy of talking about more down the road is that if you just add a gratuity line for the kitchen on your receipt and say you're tipping the kitchen, that's not, I mean, good for you. And I want people to want to pay the kitchen staff more money. So that's a step in the right direction. But frankly, that's not really, first of all, it's not going to do a whole lot. People are going to leave $1 and $2 tips, and that's it. There's going to be low participation. You're going to get all the negatives from it. But it also is going to perpetuate that idea that restaurant owners are asking guests to solely pay for increases in their operation. And that's not what the tip the kitchen model is about at all. It is a partnership. It needs to be a partnership. If it's not a partnership, it's not the tip the kitchen model.
Yeah. Awesome stuff. We're going deep, and you're giving us gold, man. I think we're about ready to do some open it up for Q&A, but I want to make sure you mentioned something quickly, Backstop. And you said that's the one thing you haven't talked about. So
yeah,
I'll make sure we do touch on that. What do you mean by Backstop?
Okay. So this I think answers one of the questions from before, and this is really important. So it's only reasonable to assume that if somebody leaves a tip for the kitchen, sometimes they may take that away from what they were going to leave the front of the house. We see this about a third of the time, about 30% of the time is I was going to leave a 20% tip to the server, but instead of doing that, I'm going to leave 10% to the kitchen, and I'm going to leave 10% to the front of the house. So because they're trying to reward the kitchen, they end up punishing the front of the house, which isn't fair to the front of the house. And so what my company does is we provide a backstop. We call it the backstop, which means that if we see a split tip, a tip that is in any way split, we subsidize, we provide the difference to get all of the servers to 22% on those tips. So regardless of whether it was going to be a 20% tip or 22% tip or 18% tip, we guarantee up to 22% in the event that, or maybe it's 23%. I can't remember, but it's, let's say 22 for easy math. We guarantee 22% on any split tip, no matter what, for our service staff. That includes the bartenders as well.
How do you know it's a split tip and just not a bad tip?
I've been asked that a couple of times. I don't, but I think I don't sort of from a binary sense. I do functionally, because if we see, we study tip percentages as well for our staff. And so if we see a trend where somebody's consistently getting bad tips, we're able to filter that out pretty quickly. But most of the time, our staff is really good. And so that's not a problem that we have to deal with a lot. If there are situations that have happened where, if somebody gets a 0% tip and the kitchen gets a tip, we don't assume that's a split check. We assume there's a problem with that ticket or that customer, frankly. If the customer's leaving a 0% tip, the problem's with them. I don't care what the server did. But that's just because I used to wait tables and bartend. And there's no reason for a 0% tip ever. I don't care what they did. Although somebody's going to message and say, oh, what if they throw a banana cream pie in my face? Okay, fine. Don't leave a tip. Just leave. But otherwise, you shouldn't leave a 0% tip. So if it's a 0% tip, it's not intended to be a split tip.
So do you have your
10% and 10%? It is.
Do you have your manager going through every ticket and looking for split tips, or is there a standard operating procedure where it's the server's job to bring that to the attention of the manager?
When the server does the paperwork at the end of the night, they separate all checks where the tip, the server tip, has been noticeably reduced, i.e. anything, I think it's like 15% or below is where we start to really notice, because people don't tip that normally in our restaurants. I think our restaurant company-wide tip percentage is around 23% company-wide. And so if we see 15% and then we see a 5% tip to the kitchen, clearly that's where the difference went. And so we pay them the difference. And so if, let's say it's a $100 tip, right? Or I'm sorry, let's say it's a $100 check. $10 goes to the kitchen, $10 goes to the server or the bartender. What we do is we throw in $12 towards the server to make sure the server gets their 22%. So far, since we started this, we've paid $200,000 to the servers and the bartenders. So clearly that was an important part of our model, because our tip percentage before that we started Tip the Kitchen and after is actually identical. It's within a tenth of a point. So our tip percentage hasn't gone up or down, but our volume has gone up by like a huge margin. And I think because of the backstop, it's allowed it to stay flat like that.
So the SOP there is, if you get a tip that's below 15%, red flag it, present it to your manager, and they'll bring it up to 23% if that's the case.
If it's split, I mean, if it's 15%, there's no tip for the kitchen.
Yeah, if you can identify
you can
that,
get a good tip.
But the red flag is 15% or
and
less.
at the end of the night, I mean, there's lots of them. I mean, at the end of the night, we'll have dozens of these things, and so the servers will stack them up on their receipts. They'll write it on their paperwork, so it's very visible where it is, and then the managers will, note it in the report itself, in the end-of-day report.
Patrick, this has been a great conversation, man. I got exactly what I was hoping to get. Details, good. Very fine details on how to implement this. I think we might even be able to take it further. I mean, if you guys are listening to this and you're not in the network, I think what we can do in the future is maybe host just a Q&A, because I think there's probably gonna be a lot of questions with this if you're willing to do that. Or if you're interested in being a part of that, email me, eric@restaurantunstoppable.com. I'll add you to a list so you can be sure to join us. And you don't have to be in the network for that one, because I think that this is so important that we are transforming the industry, that I don't want anything to keep you from being a part of that conversation. So if you want to be a part of that conversation, email me, eric@restaurantunstoppable.com. And what I'll do is I'll get you a 30-day trial to the network to be a part of the conversation, so you can make that conversation. That way we can get you in, so you don't miss this opportunity to learn how to solve this problem, for lack of a better term. So, all right, we're back. And the first question coming at us is from Harlan Scott, past guest on the show, multiple repeat guests on the show. Harlan, congratulations. I think you got recognized last year for doing some good stuff down in Texas.
Yeah, thank you. I'm about to open a second location of a restaurant in Austin, and I'm very interested in finding a model where my kitchen can participate in the tips. I was going to come at it from a different angle, but we'll get not important for this call. But when you're posting jobs for cooks, are you able to say, hey, we're going to pay you X an hour, but my cooks average, $6 more an hour in tips, and therefore are you able to pay slightly below market with your wages? Or like, do you do the job posting to say, hey, cooks average $25, $30 an hour? Are you able to see some benefit there to reduce your bottom line?
To reduce my costs? Yeah. I mean, so we did an initiative in June where we announced that our minimum wage was $15 an hour for all staff. And so that's sort of our floor. And sure, I mean, if we haven't gotten there yet, but I think if you wanted to do something where you said, okay, all new hires, no matter what position you have, get paid $15 an hour. And then with each successive, 6 months or performance-based, they go up $1 here, $1 there. The Tip the Kitchen model is getting them an extra $60 a shift. So when we advertise it, we advertise not only what their fixed hourly would be, but also what their earning potential or what the performance has been previously. And that has helped us immensely get people in the door.
Right. And then you're paying $15 an hour for your servers as well?
No, we just guarantee they make $15. They make we do guaranteed. $5 an hour for servers, $5 an hour for servers, and then their tips.
Do you feel that sometimes when people make that choice to tip the kitchen, they'll split the difference, and instead of giving 20% to the server, do 10 and 10? How often do you see that?
It's about actually, I've got it right here in front of me. It's about 30% of the time that we've seen that so far. So 30% of the time when people actually leave a tip. So for the kitchen. So of all of the Tip the Kitchen receipts that we've gotten, which constitutes 21% of our total customer base, 30% of those are what we call a split ticket or a split tip, where 10% or 11% the kitchen, 11% front of the house.
And thank you. Last question. Why do you choose to match it? I mean, are they not already just coming out way ahead with just this additional tip that they're getting? Matching it seems like additional exposure that might be unnecessary because what you're doing is so progressive and pro-employee anyway.
I think I know the answer, and I'm proud of myself.
Okay, Eric, let's see how you do with this, Eric. Go ahead.
Because it has to be I think the message I got is it has to be a team effort, and it has to be you can't ask from your guests what you're not willing to do yourself. It's a level of buy-in that's necessary in order for it to work.
That's correct. And Harlan, I think an important point here is to say that this model is adaptive and sliding. So I chose the $500 match number because I was trying to forecast like each store. Okay, let's say for every $1 million that we're going to do in sales, I'll put $100 in. And that was just, it was very arbitrary. But it's clear that like, for example, our store Tempest, which is smaller, it's not quite fine dining, but that's sort of the idea. That doesn't generate revenue on par with like our church and union concepts. In fact, less than half. And so having that place match the same level that church and union does seems incongruent and burdensome. Now, I don't care because we're still doing fine at Tempest, so we're not going to change it. But if you're a restaurant that's forecasting doing, let's say, $1 million in sale or $2 million in sales, instead of it being a $500 match, maybe it's a $100 match or a $200 match. And so that can limit the amount of sort of cash liability exposure that you could have on a weekly basis if everyone participates, and gets you the full match every day.
Gotcha.
I think it's also important to bring to the conversation that you said, since you started doing this, you've seen an increase in sales by $3 million. So maybe, you're giving up 3.3% of your operational expense increases 3.3%, but how much more profit or how much more total revenue are you bringing in as a result? So are you still becoming more profitable? So like you're taking a hit up front, but over time you're making up those costs and you're increasing total revenue. So you're actually still coming out far more on top. Correct me, I'm not a numbers guy, but correct me if I'm wrong.
What you're saying is right. I think the direct expense increase is around 3%, a little over 3%. From, again, if you're looking at this only, but once you take into consideration all the expenses that you're saving, and I'm sure Harlan and lots of other restaurant owners know that feeling. You nailed it before, Eric. I think we're going to end up spending around 1.5% on this program from our top line. The difference is that our top line has increased by, company-wide by, 80% or something since 2019. Now, obviously, we have more stores, so that's not a one-to-one number, but they've gone up substantially because we've been able to handle the volume and because the product that we put out is better than it was pre-COVID and more consistent.
Yeah. Harlan, any pushback on that?
No.
Bob, I see you patiently with your hand up, and I know you must have tons of questions. So Patrick, take a breath. He's always got a good one. Go for it, Bob.
I am absolutely enthralled with the concept of somebody trying another hybrid of the model that we built in 2000. Okay. By the way, Patrick, Danny Myers, when you hear him talk about no tipping, that's me.
Oh,
yeah. So what's the
question?
Thank
you for trying it.
What's your question, buddy?
Well, here's the thing. The reason why he stopped doing it after he initiated it, and he was the only one that actually did it verbatim for the way we wrote it, was 40% of his front of the house ran for the hills. Okay?
Right.
And they found out later that 10% of them were stealing.
Right. Yeah.
Okay, let's not go into that subject.
Right.
I can give you horror stories of guys where I was I was the CFO of a company and I looked at their tipping, policy. I said, you can't do that. It's illegal. They said, we're not changing it. Have a nice day. And 2 years later, they got hit with 1.75 million in penalties.
So what's different about this that's not illegal?
Well, what's different about this is that none of the things, you see all the hoops that the poor guy has to go jump through to take it to another level. And that's a problem for me.
You're talking about, when you say hoops, you're talking about matching?
Well, I'm just talking about the subsidizing I'm talking about the additional line on POS. I'm talking about the educational process. I'm talking about all, when you really, that's why I asked the question, what was the tipping percentage pre-model? Was it at least 20?
You mean for our service staff?
Yeah.
Our service staff company-wide made around 23% pre-model.
Okay.
And we did a study like 2 weeks ago, and since starting Tip the Kitchen, it's at 23%. In fact, it really hasn't changed substantially at all from a percentage standpoint.
I got into some real trouble on an old website, formerly known as foodservice.com, because we got into a match back and forth online about this tipping model in 2010. And they claimed that it only worked for, Tom Keller and $125 cover and blah, blah, blah. Mm-hmm. And I tried to explain to them that that's not true. Mm-hmm. And I got disgusted and put the model on the website. Okay. And the premise was the same things you were talking about. The elimination of the wage gap. Okay. A substantial model change. Hell, if you go to Europe, no, I'll make it better. If you go to Japan and try to tip, they think that's insulting. Mm-hmm. Okay. Mm-hmm. So it's a culture change situation. Mm-hmm. And the basis here of me asking you what the tipping percentage was that's what your customers were willing to pay. Okay. You could have raised your prices by that percentage and said, no more tipping, guys and gals. It's the exact same money that you're paying already. Okay. The difference is I'm going to pay over, not just a living wage. I'm going to pay over and above a living wage.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
With benefits and a million other things that I can go into detail about, which I'm sure you're aware of.
So thank you very much, Bob. Patrick, I kind of think I know what you're thinking, but I want to hear from you. What's your pushback on that? And Bob, I don't know if there's any other questions. Do you guys have other questions?
Well, no, I love the idea of not tipping. It's if you read about tipping, right, and its history, it's got a pretty ugly history. That said, I'm not trying to solve a sociological problem that's 100 years old. I'm trying to solve an economic problem that's right now. And the way that you do that is by having the environment shift in small pieces rather than having some, really revolutionary change one shot that not everybody's on board for. And so while I would love nothing more than to get rid of tipping and just have it be, I'll raise my prices, 25, 30% and be done with it. I don't think that at least this country is ready for that yet. And I know that lots of other restaurants are not going to do it. And so, like I said before, with my criticism of the Union Square model was not that the model was bad, but that if you can't get other people to participate, your staff leaves, which is what Bob just mentioned. I don't need other restaurants to participate with Tip the Kitchen. I'll just do it. If they don't want to do it, then I'll do it. And I'll enjoy purchasing power that exceeds theirs by 50 to 100%. That's the advantage of this, is that this model is not mandatory for all of our guests. It's not mandatory for any of our guests. You can participate, you don't have to. And the ratio of people that have is a vast minority. I mean, it's 21%. There are, 2 out of 10 people actually even do this. And it's enough where every single one of the people that work in my kitchens makes not just a livable wage as per like Johns Hopkins or New York Times or whoever sets that number, MIT had a report, but rather what I think is a livable wage. What we decided in my company was a livable wage based on local rent and grocery costs, which was, I think we had it either like $49,000 or $50,100, something like that. That's what I want. I want everyone that works for me to make over $50,000 a year. That's the objective. And so far, we're getting really close. The average is over that, but we still have, the low end of the average is still slightly below it. So that's what we're working towards.
So I did have one more question regarding payout. Are you paying out at the end of the shift, or is that going to the paycheck?
It's all paychecks. So we used to do tips at the end of the night for everybody. And what ended up happening was we were keeping, tens of thousands of dollars on site. And unfortunately, that's dangerous. It's dangerous for your management. It's dangerous to have that kind of cash around. And frankly, I just rather not have that kind of cash. And so we put everything on paychecks on a weekly basis. And, when you get your paycheck on Friday, there's your tip of the kitchen.
No, the only other question I have is there a system that you're implementing to track that? Is it an Excel? Like, what are you doing to, at the end of the day, you had this much money come in from tip to kitchen. You split that up between, we went over the qualifying factors. Then, like, where does that money go to track? Like, how are you tracking that?
Yeah, we have a spreadsheet for each. So there's a master spreadsheet that just is sort of the blank version, and then we save each week at a bottom tab. And it's if you click on the week, like I can literally go into my computer right now into our file share and go back to the second week that we started this and look at each individual person that was working in the kitchen, each individual shift, and see how much they made, because it lists it out for them. And then we keep that forever. So if there's ever a question, if ever somebody in the kitchen, like here's an important thing. Actually, we missed this before, Eric. Kitchen staff is receiving tips now, which means that they have a whole different kind of tax that they have to worry about that they didn't have to worry about before. The front of house staff does. And so what we did was we made our accounting team available, and our in-house bookkeeping team, and then our accountants themselves available to all of our staff if they ever have a question about how the money is taxed, so that they don't. So I want it to be 100% transparent. I don't want them to think that there's something going on. I know sometimes I get a paycheck, or I used to anyway, and I you see how much the government takes out, and you're like, oh my God, I don't want them to have that feeling without understanding that that's just sort of how it works in America, and not something that we're doing to them. So our accountants are available to them, and I would 100% encourage anybody who's thinking about doing this to make sure that people that can speak intelligently about finance can talk to your kitchen team about how to pay their taxes properly.
We had a message come in from Jeffrey. We are currently using Kickfin for tip out. Works great, especially not having to keep the extra cash. Have you heard of Kickfin?
No, but it's great. I'll check. What's it called?
Yeah,
Kickfin?
Kickfin, like kick a ball, fin of a fish. If you want to jump on.
There's some members of my team, I think, watching right now. So go ahead and get started on that, guys. Please. Yeah. Kickfin.
We got time for one more, Bob. I'm going to go ahead and let you have the mic one more time, and then we'll wrap it after that.
Okay, I appreciate it. Patrick, give something some thought. One of the things that we did when we did the no tipping model is we took it to another level when we reached about 2015 or 2016. We did away with hourly employees.
Mm-hmm.
We put everybody on salary.
Yeah.
We gave everybody 40 hours.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a good idea.
And I got in trouble for saying this, but I'll say it again. We turned the restaurant model into a real company model. Mm-hmm. When you go to Macy's and buy something retail, they're not transparently telling you line by line what the charges are. Yeah. When you go buy a car, they're not telling you what the commission from the sale was. They're not telling you anything. They're telling you this is how much it is, and we're paying people X dollars a year. That's it. There is no, act like a real company. Mm-hmm. And give, when you go to work for a company, right? It's base, it's bonus, it's benefits, it's expenses, it's stock, it's 401, etc. Why doesn't the restaurant do that? Because inherently, we're running a 1905 model with low skilled people that couldn't get a job anyway. And this is an opportunity for them to make a living. Well, that criteria doesn't work anymore. That's, you want to make, you said it yourself, you want to make the industry a career choice. Mm-hmm. Okay. And that's going to elevate the level of the skill set where you want to hire, quote unquote, food service professionals. Okay. And that's the difference. The other thing I didn't hear you talk about is when you look at that model, the first thing that comes to mind is what everybody's talking about now: automation, robotics, things that are going to cut headcount. Okay, if you did that, you could do away with your subsidies.
Bob, thank you. I tell you all the time, I love you, right? I gotta beat you,
problem, baby.
Because you're not asking a question, but you are making a great point.
My final question was, what is the future of his model?
Thank you.
I mean, the goal, Bob, is I just want this to be a serious industry. And I think that you really just hammered it with your answer, is that, you know, we lost hundreds of thousands of people to banking, to graduate programs, to real estate, maybe tens of thousands. But we've lost a lot of really talented people that are young, that would have probably stayed in the restaurant business, but they aren't because of the environment that it's you know, perpetuating. And the way to start fixing that, obviously there's lots of issues, and we talked about a little bit to start this interview, but I mean, the biggest thing is just making sure that people can make a livable wage. And if you don't have that, then the rest of this doesn't matter. Like, if your staff is not making enough money to pay themselves, to make a livable wage, to pay their rent on time, to pay for groceries, what they're going to end up doing is they're going to be depressed. They're going to use drugs. They're going to use alcohol. They're going to, you know, be miserable all the time. Maybe a few of those people will be able to get through and get, you know, on with a career like I did. I wasn't using drugs, but I was, you know, when you're in your early 20s and you're working 60 hours a week and getting tips, it's not real. It's not sustainable. It's, you know, every summer, the reason I actually moved into management as a restaurant employee was because I was a bartender. I was tired of the summers where I was making, you know, $50 working 10 hours a day. I thought it was ridiculous. I'm like, how do I pay the bills in July and August and September? And so I went into salaried management because I had to live a normal life. So the more that we can do to make the economics work first is where it starts to minimize the transients. If you pay people right, it will attract good people. And the more good people you have, the more, let's say, professional people you have, the more professional people it will attract. Yeah.
Patrick, this was a great conversation, man. Thank you so much. And I'm not saying this is the only solution. I'm not saying this is the answer, but it might be the answer for some people. And
yeah, it's an answer for now. I think it's an answer. It's an answer for now for certain kinds of businesses. And, you know, we're going to open a restaurant at the end of this year called Ophelia's in Nashville, though we might change that name. But that's a smaller scale. Like I'm forecasting around $3 million in sales there. So we'll probably do a slightly smaller match because we're not doing, you know, $4, $5, $6 million. We might do like a $300 match. And so the data that comes back from there will be more transferable to maybe some of the smaller operators that are out there that are like, well, I'm not doing 8 million, so I can't take 3% more from my bottom line. Well, maybe that will be a better example of how it will work in a smaller scale.
If you guys if you're listening to this and you have other solutions, other models, I know Harlan said he was working towards another model. I encourage you to reach out to me to share what you're doing. We can continue the dialogue. And I did mention that I would love to do another Q&A and maybe a deeper dive. We can set up some screen sharing to show how things are set up. Who knows? But I do think that this is a really interesting approach. And if we have questions for you, Patrick, what's the best way to connect?
The Twitter page is probably the best one, honestly, because that's where most of the content is. That's I know a lot of people don't use Twitter, but it's tip_kitchen, and that's where all the data is. We've got one on Instagram. I think we're going to have one on Facebook soon. But and then you can email me at patrick@fivechurch.com. And then my whole team really are experts now on all this. So I've got a whole group of people, and this is really important. We want people to do this because we think it makes the industry better. People that know me, I don't really like press. I like hiding out. I like our chef to get the press. I don't really do a lot of self-promotion, but I think that this particular model is the most important thing that I'll ever do. And I think it's going to make an indelible impact on so many people that work with me, and hopefully other people. We want this to be out there in the world. We published it for free. There's no model, there's no charge, there's nothing. Just look at the system, and if it works for you, contemplate it. And if you think it works, give us a holler.
Beautiful. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us again, to share your knowledge and to be a part of this mission to inspire, empower, and transform the industry. There is no questioning, my man. You are unstoppable.
Thank you, Eric.
We'll cut it there. Oh, I should mention before we say goodbye, this is episode 863. Head over to restaurantunstoppable.com/863. We'll do our best to summarize, and we'll have the contact information, the social handles over there as well. Beautiful. Thank you so much.